G'day everyone, Kate here from Narrate. This past weekend we had the great pleasure of hosting guest speaker William Paul Young, writer of internationally renowned book The Shack, as well as other novels including Crossroads and most recently Eve. He gave a different message at each of our 3 Sunday morning gatherings, hence we have posted them all. Enjoy.
So good to see you this morning. I had to get up early too, so who are the Broncos playing? Saints? Oh. I won't even go there. In a world divided by all sorts of things. Let's see. We do have a couple things in common. And these 2 things in common that we all have, regardless of our political persuasions or our ethnicity or our historical or cultural backgrounds, our religious perspectives, we share 2 things that have the power to change us. And in this broken world, you can't avoid them. One is great loss, and one is great love. Those things we all share. And if we had everybody raise their hand, which not, but if we did, that knows someone or has a family member who has had to deal with the issue of cancer, almost everyone in the room would raise their hands. We live in a broken world. And great loss and great love have a way of changing us like almost nothing else. At least great loss sometimes brings to the surface all kinds of things that need to be healed, need to be touched. I am a Canadian born, so born up in northern Alberta, up in Peace River country. And a year old, my parents and I was the firstborn, we moved to the highlands of New Guinea where I grew up as a missionary kid. So I am a third culture kid. A third culture kid is probably a better encompassing term than the standard missionary kid. A third culture kid is a child who grows up in a culture that's distinct from their parents. And then they're shifted back into their parents' culture where they don't fit or belong. And then, by the time they get back to the culture in which they were raised, they don't fit or belong there either. And they become sort of global nomads. And the issue of belonging becomes front and center for us. And for a lot of us, and that, would include military brats and diplomat kids and certain businesses that have children that are raised around the world. But for those of us who come from that world, if we don't find someone to belong to, belonging is never about geography, and we always are struggling with the issue of belonging. So I grew up, I was a year old, we moved into the highlands of New Guinea, which was a Dutch colony at the time that I moved in. So I've got a Canadian passport. My sister Debbie, who was born under Dutch control, had a Dutch passport. My brother Tim, the UN had come in and taken control, and then my brother Stephen was under Indonesian control. And the 3 of them were born in the same place, and we had 4 different passports, which made border crossings really interesting. Evangelical fundamentalists, right? And that's my world that I grew up in. I had some great sadnesses as a child. 3 in particular, I already named you one of them, and that was the issue of belonging. And that sort of dominated my life for a number of different reasons. But I had a very hard relationship with my dad. My dad didn't have a chip for being a dad. He was brought up in the midst of incredible hardship and loss. Orphaned when he was 12, working in the logging camps when he was 14 after he ran away from the farms where they had shuttled children's services in the day, would take the boys and spread them out into farm labor. And they would watch the families through the windows. And worked the fields during the days. They usually lived in the barns. And then he ran away from that and into the logging camps at 14. At 18, has a massive come to Jesus moment, a Sawdust Trail revival meeting, and walks out of the logging camp. And logging camps, very warm, embracing. And he walks into Bible school where he meets my mom. They get married, takes a church up in the Peace River for a year. I'm born up there, Grand Prairie. And then when I'm a year old, we move out. So you can see he has all the equipment for being a dad. And he was a very angry, young, religious man. And he had a theology that was very angry, too. So I grew up with a very a man who, for me, was terrifying most of the time. And it took me 50 years to wipe the face of my father off the face of God. And it was a long journey. And my relationship with my dad is woven into that story, which is a whole story by itself. The other great sadness for me was sexual abuse that started in the tribal culture before I was 5 and twisted me up so badly that by the time I was 6, I was already somewhat of a predator. I go at 6 to boarding school, missionary boarding school on the coast, and the big boys would come at night and molest the little boys. So there's nothing that rips the soul of a human being apart as much, I think, as that sort of abuse. You have every sense of boundary destroyed, and all you have is shame as the underlying truth of your life. Loss, right? Some kinds of losses are things that are stolen from us. That we never asked for. Some kind of losses happen along the way because we who are broken begin to break things ourselves. And we start breaking the people around us. And then there are losses in which we have to learn how to let things go. Because for a lot of us, the way we grow up, the prisons that we find ourselves in, become our companions and our friends. They're more certain than the risk of actually trusting someone. And so this whole journey for me has been one about trust. That's at the core. I like religion as a religious kid because you didn't have to trust anybody. All you had to do was know what to do to perform your way into somebody's approval or affection, but you never had to trust them. And so you can see that in my world, trust becomes a very big issue. It turns out, I didn't know this till I was in my 20s. Turns out that I'm actually smart. I didn't know that. And when you have a life that is a whole ocean of shame covered up by a thin layer of perfectionist performance, you just think you fool people. And you keep all your secrets. Here's the metaphor of the shack. It's the house on the inside that people help you build. And you can read the book as just a story, but you can also read it as a parable, and it's talking about something deeper. I had a writer from Nashville when the book first came out, and she wrote me and she said, I don't know who you are. Nobody knew who I was. I don't know who you are, but my sense is that Missy, who's the main character, Mackenzie's daughter, who is abducted and evidence found that she has probably been murdered, that Missy represents something murdered in you as a child, probably your innocence. And Mackenzie is you as the adult trying to deal with it. And I showed it to Kim, and she said, boy, she nailed it. Because it's true. I'm both Missy and Mackenzie. Mackenzie Allen Phillips, Melissa Ann Phillips, both initials spell map. They're just different kinds of maps. And I write this story the year I turned 50 because I finally felt healthy enough as a human being to do something that Kim has been asking me to do. People ask me, why did you write the book? I say, I was trying to do like the Bible says and submit to my wife. And everybody laughs like it's funny, you know. It's there. It's in the Bible. It says submit one to another, and she's one of the others. Huh? So I've been a writer my whole life, but writing is a way for me to get the inside world out. And I wrote, stuff that anybody does. You write poetry and songs and short stories, and you give them to your friends and family, and they think you're the bomb, And it's because they're your friends and family. So I'd written gifts for years, and Kim said for about 4 years, someday, she said, as a gift for our children, and we have 6, and she said, would you please write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box. And by the way, later when it actually got into print, she said, when I asked you to do this, I was thinking like 4 to 6 pages. So I use the metaphor of the shack, the house on the inside that people help you build. It's a broken heart. It's the broken soul. And I'm thrilled when people talk about growing up in a family environment in which they were affirmed and encouraged and embraced. And that's what I want for my children. But a lot of us, we didn't grow up in a place where we had good help building the house on the inside. And so that little shack on the inside becomes the place where we hide all our addictions. We store up all our secrets. And it's a house of shame and pain and held together by lies. And we never want another human being to ever find it, because we're terrified that they will hate us if they find out the truth of what we think about ourselves. They will hate us the way that we do. And we just can't bear it. Here's the power of secrets. Secrets absolutely trap us. Absolutely. Because we're caught between a dilemma. We don't tell our secrets because we're terrified. We're terrified that I will see the look of disgust on your face if you come into my shack. So we build a facade 100 yards out. Facade, they use it in movies to make it look like there's a real building there and stuff. And it's a 1/4-inch piece of plywood that you can paint as fast as you can pick up people's expectations. And so you learn to live from the outside in because you never want anybody coming inside, because that's where you store all your secrets. But you perform. You're trying to win the affection and approval because it's the only thing that keeps you alive and sustains you. And here's the problem. When somebody comes into your life, a community of people, somebody who befriends you, and they offer you the very things that keep you alive: kindness, goodness, grace, forgiveness, affection, approval. We who have secrets don't believe them. Here's why. Because they don't know our secrets. We think if they knew, then what they're offering they would withdraw. You understand? So we're totally caught by secrets. We have to either keep them in because we don't want anybody to find out about them, and we perform our way into approval and affection, not just with people, with God. And we don't believe when we're offered the very things that would keep us alive. It's crazy. We're designed to be open and authentic and living without secrets. And let me tell you, it's a hard road to get to the place where you no longer have secrets. Mackenzie's weekend in the shack represents 11 years for me. 11 years of dismantling everything I thought about myself and the world, about God, and rebuilding it, going into the shack. Because I found out something, that God never loved the facade. All my performance, all my trying to win the approval through performance, God always loved the shack, as broken as it was. And in the book, if you read it, Mackenzie goes back he thinks he might be having a conversation with God, the God that he grew up with. You remember, he goes back into this broken down place, and God is a no-show. And the reason that God that he grew up with is a no-show is because I don't believe he exists. And so he's a no-show in the book. But it's the God that Mackenzie knows, thinks he knows, and now he's furious. And in his fury, he tears the place apart. And he says, I hate you and I'm done. Most honest prayer he's ever prayed. Because the God he grew up with is a no-show. I get invited a lot by the Brits because they always want to ask me about their atheists. Dawkins and Hitchens and the boys. And so what do you think about Dawkins and Hitchens? I go, well, I agree with them. What? You agree with them? Yeah, I don't think the God that they don't think exists either. Yeah? They make a lot of good points. if that's who God was, I wouldn't want to believe in him, So Mackenzie goes back, and his imagination of God is absolutely disrupted. And then he is about to leave. His eyes are opened up to see that what was the shack in actual fact is something that is beautiful. And he doesn't understand, and he's disoriented, and he goes back and raises his fist one more time, but this time to knock, and he doesn't even get a chance because the door blows open, and out comes 3 persons from inside his shack who have been there the whole time, and he didn't know it. And they wrap him up with relentless affection, spin him around, call him by name, and he doesn't know who they are. And he hasn't confessed or repented yet. I wrote The Shack as a Christmas present for my kids. Our youngest was 13 at the time. And I got it done in time for Christmas. Made 15 copies at Office Depot in Gresham. Serious. 15 copies with a little spiral-bound thing, plastic cover. I gave 6 to the kids at Christmas. Kim got a copy. The leftovers I gave to my friends. And I went back to work. Not one time had it crossed my mind to publish it. I don't know anything about publishing. So I make 15 copies, and those 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that book to do. Hear me clear. Those 15 copies did everything I wanted that book to do. And the other thing that I tell people all the time, because I wrote the book when we were living in a little 900 square foot space, and Kim got a job at the high school bakery, which is 2.5 blocks away, and I would ride the train to one of my 3 jobs. And I wrote it because I had nothing else to give my kids for Christmas. The other thing, this was at the end of the 11-year dismantling, rebuilding journey. Now, there's lots of finish work to do in my life, but I've been through the major reconstruction. And when you go into this period of time in your lives, you don't know how long it's going to take. When you're in it, it feels like at least 2 or 3 infinities. It's like this is going to take forever. And 11's not a magic number. It just was the years that it worked for me. Because from the point where my world blew up and I was entirely exposed, which was January 4th, 1994, to the end of 2004, every major fear and every piece of dismantling happened, so that by 2005, I was the healthiest person that I knew. And that meant I had no secrets left in my life. There is nothing in my world that Kim doesn't know, that my children don't know, or my friends don't know. Nothing. And I have no addictions. And I'm not just talking the yucky addictions. I'm also talking the gold-chained addictions, like doing something great for God, like pleasing my dad, right? And I'm the same person in every situation. I'm no different here with you as I am with our 9 grandkids, who are 9 years old and under, and let me tell you about them. No. Or when I'm in a hotel room by myself. And I write this little story, and I get it done, and I go back to work. And, you give a book to your kids for Christmas. It's like, thanks, Dad. We'll get right on that. How do you turn it on? So it took them a while to read it, but my friends were all over it, and they start giving it to their friends, which starts this whole crazy chain reaction. Crazy chain reaction. And I'm just like, what is this? So I got caught in the middle of something that was totally unexpected. People ask me if I'm surprised. Yeah. 15 copies did everything that I ever wanted that book to do. And understand this too, and this is the other thing. Everything that matters to me was in place before I wrote The Shack. My identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, love. They were all in place before I wrote The Shack. The book hasn't given me any of those things. What it has given me is an invitation into the holy ground of other people's stories. In an unprecedented way, I get to be in some of the greatest sadnesses that you can imagine. It's a cross of its own. But people invite me into that space because the book has landed in the middle of their great sadnesses. And the book gave people a couple things. One is, it gave them a language to have a conversation about God that wasn't religious. It was relational. And the other thing it did is it validated our tears. Our sadnesses actually matter. And we live in a world where grief and lamenting are not allowed very long. And we step away from our losses rather than finding Jesus in the middle of them. And so I wrote this story because I'm saying to my kids, I want you to know the God, which they do, but I want you to know the God that showed up and actually healed my heart, not the God that I grew up with. And this is why God the Father does not come through the door as Gandalf with a bad attitude. But this large, black, embracing woman. And that mattered to me. It got me into a lot of trouble, but maybe in the next, I don't know. By the way, I don't ever do two things twice. I'd never know where we're going, and I'd have no plan. So whatever the other two services are, but I'll tell other stories and stuff. Who knows? Just so you know. But let me wrap up a story inside this one. So we've got about 10 minutes. But here's a point. It took me 50 years to actually believe that God is good all the time. I had a theology where he was only good some of the time. And when he wasn't good, it was because he's God, and how can we understand him? But you can't trust someone that you don't believe is good. And you can't trust someone who you don't believe loves you. And so my whole world about control became really the question of trust. And trust I couldn't put in God the Father. Because the way I grew up, God the Father was the darkness behind Jesus that Jesus came to save me from. Right? It wasn't Jesus that needed to be appeased. It was the darkness, the God, the big God, the God the Father behind Jesus. And so, he was willing to beat his son like my dad was willing to do it. Do you understand how all of that is all mixed up? And I found out that all of those things were lies. And that's a whole part of the conversation. But God is good all the time. God is light, and in God there is no darkness at all. Any darkness that you will find in creation is what we have brought to the table because we turned from the light and cast a shadow that became our reality. We forgot that we were a very good creation before the stuff that was broken was broken. That is truer about us. God has a very high view of humanity, not a low one. The year before I wrote the book, and it took another couple years after I wrote it to get it actually into print, which is a whole story by itself too. But the year before I wrote it, my 11th year started with a real major confrontation about one big fear that had waited 11 years to show up. I'd been working my way through these things inside relationships and community. My world was open. And this fear was the fear of financial insecurity. I don't know if any of you have faced that. It is such a monumental driver. And if there's anything that's going to freak us out, it's that. Because rather than trusting the goodness of God, we will resort to control of one sort or another. That's what you do with fear. And there's nothing that does it quite like financial insecurity. And so at the beginning of 2011, at the beginning of 2004, which the end of 2004 is the end of 11 years. I'm realizing that we're in financial trouble. And it's partly due to the economy, but partly due to decisions that I'd made historically that were coming back to roost. You know, consequences are not punishment. You understand? Consequences are because God has a high view of us and our choices matter, and we have to deal with them, right? So back in the day when I lived a hidden life, I justified it like, well, I don't want to bother Kim with this because it'll really be emotionally difficult for her. You know, all that BS stuff that we do. And because we don't actually want to deal with the relationship. We want to control their spirituality so that we're safe. You know, because you come from my background, everything's about staying safe. And so Kim now knows everything. And I'm having the conversation at the beginning of the year, and I know we're in trouble. So I have about a 5-day conversation with God. And I'm going like every day. How come I've trusted you my whole life with our finances, and we've been up and down and up and down and up and down? Now, this is 11 years into the dismantling, rebuilding process, and I have the audacity to start a conversation with, how come I've trusted you my whole life about anything? Do you understand the delusional power that our self-assumptions have? It's unreal. And for 5 days, I'm having this knockdown, drag out, trying to get, here's what I want God to say to me. Oh, man, I feel your pain. Let's go find some money. You know? Yeah. But what I hear is not that. 5 days into this is what I hear. And I'm quoting. Now, I've never heard God speak audibly, but I've lived long enough in relationship to know the voice that's not mine. And it often says things that I would not say to myself. It's, Paul, are you ready to listen? That's the first thing I hear. Well, yeah, why do you think that I'm, praying this hard? Paul, you have never trusted me with your finances. Are you kidding? Even that little piece of property that you've lived on now for 17 years that you tell people I gave you, I can't get my hands on it. Every time I try, you shade the truth. You will manipulate relationships and you will outright lie to save your ass. Quote, Old Testament quote, but it's a quote. And I hear this and I am crushed because it's true. It's true. I don't trust. And every time I've come to one of these cataclysmic crossroads where I'm confronted with some major lie that has held a hold of me for so many years, because that's wrapped up into performance and the myth of being the provider and all that, rather than God, and control and all that kind of stuff. I've had to find a way to let go of control. And so when I have this big clash, I'm just broken. I say, okay, so how do I do this? How do I trust? And so I called a dozen guys that are in my world, my friends. And that's like 12 more than there used to be. Do you understand? And I call each of them and I tell them, okay, here's our financial situation. Here's the deal. I know you love my family. You care about me. And I know you're guys and you like to fix stuff. Please, please, please don't rescue me from this. I told every one of them, please don't rescue me from this. Because they would have. A couple of them could have written a single check, boom, out, right? But that wouldn't have solved the issue. The issue is I didn't know how to trust. That fall, 7 of those guys took time off from work unbeknownst to me, and they showed up at the Clackamas County Courthouse to sit with me while they auctioned off the house that we'd lived in for 17 years. And they took the house, they took the cars, they took pretty much every material possession we had, and helped us move to a little tiny place out in the middle of 500 acres of Christmas trees, and we were there for a couple months, and then we moved into town because one of the guys gave us a car that had been in a wreck but had been fixed. But we didn't have the gas money to drive the 15 miles from where we were renting into town so that I could get on the train to go to one of my 3 jobs. And I was doing shipping and receiving for a manufacturer's circuit board manufacturing company. I was doing janitorial, cleaning toilets. I was a hotel night clerk. I was in food processing in the hotline, and I was doing web conferencing on the side. Just depended at what point you caught me inside 3 jobs. And but we moved to a little 900 square foot house on the corner of 12th Street, and it was that house that I could walk from there to the Max station and jump on the train to go downtown Portland to my main job. Kim got the job at the high school bakery, 2.5 blocks away. 4 of our kids were still at home, and then Kim has this way of changing places that she walks into, and we start getting kids from the high school dropping in. So our place becomes full. I'm going to finish this story rather than have a closing song. Is that all right? Is that okay with you? Okay. So, because it's going to take me all of the next 6 minutes. So, on the train, this is 2005, flips over, and I feel healthy, and I decide, you know what? We had nothing. And here's what we learned. The big thing when we lost all the material stuff, we learned that the opposite of more is enough. Less and more are on the same scale. They're not opposites. The opposite of more is enough. And we found out that we always had enough. And that sometimes meant $17 in our bank. You know, we couldn't buy shoes for the kids, but we always had enough. Sometimes it was $35, you know, but we had enough. And we'd always had enough. We just didn't know it. It had been masked over by our need for control and our freaking out. And we had enough. And joy dropped on us like a ton of bricks. Kim and my kids would describe this period of time as one of the best that we had ever had in our lives together. And it was hard. The transition, losing everything, the embarrassment, all of that stuff, hard. So I write this book on the train, get it done for Christmas. Make 15 copies. It becomes this, over the next few years, it becomes this international phenomenon. I mean, you have no idea. It became the number 2 book in the history of Brazil. Croatia dubbed it their book of the decade, and the Ministry of Culture contacts me to speak to the nation. You know I was shipping out soldering tips and cleaning toilets, right? And it becomes this thing. And the Germans pick it up and it becomes a bestseller. It's in like 50 languages. It's in the top 100 best-selling fictions of all history. Yeah, right. 15 copies did everything I ever wanted it to do. You have to understand, this is God's sense of humor. Right? I can still use Balaam's ass, watch, you know, so. So the Germans love the book and becomes a bestseller. They come to me and they say, Paul, we want to make a documentary out of your life. You're serious? Yeah. Really? Why would you do that? Well, our readers love to know the history of an author. Okay. Kim? Okay. So they follow us around with a camera crew. Hire Suzanne, who is one of the top videographers. She has been up the Amazon, and she's great, National Geographic type person. Kind of a new age. Most of my publishers worldwide are not faith-based or Christian. They are outside of that, which I love. I figure the faith-based people will find it, you know. But you can put an impediment by making it Christian. So they follow us around. Then they say, we want to come to Oregon in 2000. This is now going to be 2011. We want to come in 2011, May, and film you for 10 days. Because it's set in Oregon, we want to go to the places, site location shots, and we want to interview you and your family, your friends, and you know the people you talk about. So what do you think? I said, sure. They said, we have one favor. What's that? Do you know a videographer in Oregon that could shoot this for us? That way we don't have to fly someone from Germany. They'll have all the equipment. They'll know the site locations. There won't be a language issue. And I said, I know one. Because videographers are not a circle that I kind of move in, right? But I knew one, Joe Khalil. Joe Khalil had worked for Channel 8 for years. Over the years, if you watch the Rose Festival, Joe was the main videographer that shot it, right? So Joe, by the way, Joe was one of the 7 guys that sat with me at the county courthouse in 2004. But I only knew one. So I connect Suzanne with Joe, and they start the logistics conversation, and I'm out of the picture till May of 2011. Now, what I don't know until later is that Joe says to Suzanne, I can't do the job. Says, I have a commitment and I can't break it. But he said, the good news is I know every videographer in Oregon, which he does. So Joe says, I'll connect you with Bill Dolan, which he does. So now Bill Dolan, who I don't know, but I don't even know about this conversation going on, Bill Dolan is talking to Suzanne, and she says, Suzanne, I'm looking at my calendar and I can't do the job. But I know you're in a jam, so I'll take the job on paper and I'm going to subcontract it to a really capable friend of mine named Kevin Feltz. Right? One of the places that they wanted to shoot was at the little corner house on the corner of 12th Street. And I'm standing there with Suzanne next to me when Kevin Feltz walks up, this videographer that I don't know. And he's looking around and he says, hey, Paul, can I ask you a really odd question? And I'm thinking like, any question you're going to ask me is going to be odd, because I just don't know their world. And he says, back in 2005, now remember, this is May 2011. He says, back when you were living here, 2005, did you have a Christmas where you had absolutely nothing? Now, I don't know if you've hung around videographers. That is not a videographer question. And I said, yeah. He said, do you remember at Christmas someone anonymously slipping some money under your door? I said, yeah, but nobody knows about that. He said, that was me. I'm going like, what? Oh, he says, let me tell you what happened. He says, 2005, Christmas is coming, and I get a nudge that I think's the Holy Spirit. And the nudge is, give some money at Christmas to someone who has nothing. He said, but the problem was, I didn't know anybody like that. And so I'm in a quandary about it, and one day I stop into Blockbuster to pick up a movie for my kids, and I run into a guy that I used to share office space who also dropped into Blockbuster right then to pick up a movie. We live on different sides of the city. We haven't seen each other for a year. And I start talking to him, and I don't know why it comes up. But I tell him, I think I'm supposed to give some money at Christmas to someone who has nothing, but I don't know anybody like that. And he said, Paul, I didn't realize it was this house until we drove up here today, because the guy didn't tell me who lived here. He just wrote down the address. And so in the middle of the night, I put 5 $20 bills in an envelope and I slipped them under your door. I said, who's the guy at Blockbuster? He says, you don't know him. His name's Scott Klausner. I said, Scott's one of my best friends. And by the way, one of the 7 guys that sat with me at the county courthouse in 2004. And I said, Kevin, you don't understand. That $100, it paid for a couple things that Kim and I needed right then, but it also gave me the extra money to go down to Office Depot and print the first 15 copies of The Shack. There is a God who is good all the time, who submits to the darkness that we bring to the table, climbs into it with us, and builds something out of it. A God who is involved in the details of our lives, to the praise of his glory. Amen? Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.